Welcome to the Big Bass Podcast, the fishing show where size matters. My name is Ken Duke. My co-host, Terry Battisti, is on the other side of the planet in Australia, but he'll be back next time. Our producer and engineer is the great Nathan Benson. You know, no show about big bass would be complete without stories of the ones that got away. After all, it's the ones that got away that help to make the ones we actually catch so very special. In this episode of the Big Bass Podcast, we're going to hear stories about the ones that got away from some of the biggest names in the sport. It'll be what I think is a healthy reminder that even the best of us sometimes fall short. And some of these stories serve to point out that the word big is relative. A big fish doesn't have to weigh 10 pounds. It just has to be important. Our first guest is none other than Shaw Grigsby. You know, if you follow professional bass fishing, you certainly know the name Shaw Grigsby. He's a 16-time Bassmaster Classic qualifier, a 9-time BASS winner, 9 times finished in the top 10 of the Angler of the Year race. He spent more than 2 decades producing great fishing television with his show One More Cast. Shaw Grigsby, welcome to the Big Bass Podcast. Thanks for joining us, sir.
Well, Ken, thanks for having me on here.
It's a big deal to me having you on here, man. You've always been one of my favorite people in the sport. You're just a joy to be around. I've had the great privilege of being in your boat and getting to fish with you. And I've also had a chance to listen to you tell some great stories. You're one of the best storytellers in the game. But sometimes the stories you tell me make me want to cry instead of make me want to laugh. And I
don't mean to do that.
You can't help it, man. You're a good storyteller, and sometimes that means up, and sometimes that means down. And I'm going to unfortunately ask you to tell a downer story on this episode of the Big Bass Podcast. And you know, one thing we say on the Big Bass Podcast is big is a relative term. Sometimes it might mean a giant 10-pound plus largemouth. Sometimes it might mean a much smaller fish that means a lot in a certain context. And that's where we're coming to you here. Because in 1995, you were closing in on an Angler of the Year title with BASS, and you were fishing the Mississippi River. And you didn't have to have a great tournament to take AOY home, but something happened. And it's just devastating to hear, but it's also... I think, I don't know, fascinating, somehow rewarding. And I'm looking forward to your sharing that with us.
Well, you know, I went into that it was the final tournament of the year on the Mississippi River, like Quad City area. And it's a 100-point system. It was the top 100s, 100-point system. And I was ahead by 25 points. Pretty much a slam dunk. Well, I had 2 areas that were working, and it was really a tough tournament. And so I fished one the first day, and it didn't happen. And I think I may have zeroed day 1. And coming back though, the next day I caught them pretty good. And to make a long story short, I'm chipping away on them. And it's the final day. I've caught enough. I know I need just one more fish, and I'm flipping these cypress trees and I'm pitching them. And I'd gone down to 17. I thought the water is not real clear, but I thought it helped me get bites. So I moved down to 17-pound line, you know, little Texas weight, and I believe I was throwing a, you know, like a craw or something, and so I'm pitching it to the trees, and, you know, I've caught a number of fish, and I said, this is it, you know, just if I can get one more, it's a done deal. And I pitched over to a tree. There was a laydown, so a log laying horizontally on the surface, and a cypress tree right behind it. And I wanted to hit, you know, as close to the cypress tree, didn't want to go over the log. Well, I hit the log, and instead of it going and falling, it flipped over the top of it. And I'm like, doggone it. And about that time, one pumps it, you know, and and I set the hook, and it was one of these fish that was just, I mean, I just call him mean, you know, and I don't know if the hook hit him in a wrong spot, but it lit him up, and he didn't do like normal fish. He went full on tarpon mode. He came straight at me. So my line's going out around the log and coming straight back to me. And he is tail walking straight to the boat. Just, I mean, like never got in the water, just, and I'm like, oh my gosh. And it's about a 3.5 pounder. And
a really solid fish for that part of the river.
Solid fish. Yeah. And so I'm just getting ready to try to like punch my free spool and go, well, let's go around the log and get this thing off and get him. And he breaks me off. And I'm like, dadgummit. Okay. I got 20 more minutes, and I go fishing, and that was the last bite. And I go into weigh in, and I needed a 1 pound 6 ouncer to make Angler of the Year. And, that one had it by a lot. Yeah. And so it was one of those really disappointing things. And, this Angler of the Year is lifetime achievement. It's like yes. Angler of the Year and the Classic. Those are the two things that you want to do. Those are your goals when you start fishing. You want to get Angler of the Year, you want to get the Classic. And so to have that one basically in my grasp and just have a small, and when I go small, I barely clipped that log to where it flipped over the top. If I had him on this side, no problem. Set the hook, drag him around, take my time, get him in, everything's good, or just reel him up and boat flip him. But that was highly disappointing. I mean, it broke my spirit inside. That's what hurt me the most, is that it took me a while to get over it. And so that was 95, and it probably was 3 or 4 years of off and on fishing before it cleared my mind about, let's keep going, keep trying.
You told me one time about that incident. You said, like you said, it broke something inside you. You said you felt like at that moment, you felt like you knew you were never going to win Angler of the Year. You were never going to accomplish some of the goals you had for yourself. And it's unfathomable to me that somebody as talented and as ordinarily positive as you are would have thoughts like that, because you had a fabulous career after 95. You won a number of tournaments. You had some really solid classics.
I think it was back-to-back in 2000, and almost won the third one on Lake Murray, where the Bass Pro Tour is fishing right now. It was a spawn tournament just like right now, and I almost won that one. I got in the top 10, and we fished the finals. And but yeah, I righted the ship, but that still broke something. It just that one hurts. That was the bad one.
You had close calls in the Classic too. I mean, I wrote a story one time, and I don't mean this to make you feel bad, but it almost sounds bad at this point. I wrote a story one time on who is the greatest competitive angler of all time who has never won, a Red Crest, a Classic, a Wood Cup, or an Angler of the Year title. And I said, well, hands down, and I ran the numbers. I looked at everybody. Hands down, it's you.
Oh, I would have put Roland, but he won.
Roland won 9 Anglers of the Year.
Yeah, he never won the Classic, and that. So right. I see what you're saying for all of them. Yeah, I got you.
Yeah, I mean, you've had a storied career. You are legendary. You are an icon. Shoot, man, your mustache alone is an icon in the game.
Yeah,
your mustache by itself is a legend in the game.
There you go.
But you are just one of the absolute icons of our sport. And it hurts me. It pains me, because you're also a friend of mine, and it pains me to think that one fish puts you in that frame of mind. You said it really bugged you for several years, and obviously it still still
does. But you get over things, and it's like anything. It motivates you and get going. But I still think that was probably you know, looking on my career, probably the most painful moment of my career. You know, I've lost fish before that cost me the tournament. You know, and I finished second and stuff like that. I think I got almost as many seconds as I do, you know, first in my career. And in fact, I think I may have more seconds than I do. But all those seconds, they're just seconds. They're a good tournament. That one, you know, that was, you know, I think you know, in the grand scheme of things, that's about the two biggest things you can do is Angler of the Year and the Classic. That's it, you know. Red Crest now, but Angler of the Year Classic is the two biggest things you can do.
Well, you know, I think it's true that, and I've heard it said by other anglers that the Classic may do more for a guy's career, but AOY is the title that has the inner prestige among the anglers themselves. Which would you have rather had? You came wildly close to both. Which would you have preferred if you could have only gotten one?
Oh. Probably the Classic. You know, I mean, it's a one tournament deal. Anybody can win it. You know, it's 3 days of the competition, and it's just another 3-day tournament. And I mean, when you look at it in all seriousness, it's another 3-day tournament. Now you have to have things fall in place on those 3 days to win it. But it's another 3-day tournament. So, you know, I would have loved to win Angler of the Year, but if I got to choose, which nobody gets to, you work your butt off to do either one. And if I got to choose, I'd say, yeah, it'd be the Classic. But, you know, David got me in that one pretty good. And I was inches from the fish that he caught to win the Classic that year. I actually fished up to the point. He had one stump out there, and he came by me, and I saw him come by me. I said, like, he wants to come in here. And I fished up to the point, but I didn't really know about that outside stuff. I'm staying shallow pretty much and fishing some ledges and stuff. But anyway, and as soon as I left, he came back in there and caught like a 6-pounder and beat me. I'm like, oh, well, you know, if I'd known about it, that'd been a different deal, but I really did. So.
And folks, when Shaw mentions David, he's talking about David Fritz. It was the 93 Classic that David Fritz won and Shaw finished second. Man, I do not think about your career certainly as a multiple close calls. I think of your career as just absolutely stellar. I was privileged to be there and to cover some of your wins, including one on the Harris chain about a dozen years ago. And I remember doing something that I should not have done as a BASS employee at that point. You were in line to weigh, Shaw, and I'm sure you don't remember this, but
I remember it.
Well, you remember winning, but I'm sure you don't remember what I was saying.
No, I remember you.
Grant Goldbeck was making a run at you despite having had a really terrible day one. And he was making a serious run at you. And I think you were sitting in your boat in line. It was a drive-through weigh-in kind of deal. And I just walked up to you because I care about you so deeply. And I don't know why I was trying to take any potential pain away. I said, Shaw, you got him. Don't worry.
I remember that. You said, and I wouldn't believe you. I said, Ken, I appreciate that, but it won't happen until those scales read that weight. I'm not accepting nothing because you just don't know, you know. And then he weighed in, and I went, whew, and that's what I did. So yeah,
that was a great victory. And but anyway, that was I don't know if I was taking any pressure off you. Obviously not. You were going to wait until those fish hit the scales. You're a smart man. You're much smarter than me. You're not going to take anybody's word for it. But
you're a genius. There's no way I'm as smart as you.
No, you're far smarter than me. Far better angler. Far greater talent. Just like I said, you're a hero of mine, man. And I didn't want to see you sweating out the last couple of minutes.
It's a have to moment, you know, when you win, and those things are real special. You know, winning the tournament. And I don't care, you know, where it is, when it is, whether it's a club tournament or whatever. When you win one, it's special. And so, you know, it's just, you have to sweat it out till you get there. Unless, you know, I did have one on Orange Lake, which was really kind of one of these strange deals. And I believe it was back in '84. And I fished this tournament. I got paired with Harvey Bozeman, and he's just a great man and a great flipper, one of the best fishermen on Orange Lake. And I think it might have been like a club challenge or something like that. I don't know. But anyway, I had 3 fish. I had 4 fish in the live well. One of them was a little 12-inch tail turner. I mean, a dink, maybe a pound something. But the other 3 weighed about 31 pounds.
Oh my gosh.
And so I was sitting on the bank and we were waiting to weigh in, and I'd look at this sack being drug up there by somebody, and I go, dadgum, it's going to take 2 of my fish to beat him. And then another one go by, and I go, well, I got him beat with 1. Then another one go by and said, ooh, that's pretty good. Dude, it's going to take all 3 of my fish, And anyway, I weighed in 4 that went like almost 32 pounds. It was pretty fun.
Now, when the pressure is off like that, is that more enjoyable? Or when you look back, do you maybe in retrospect enjoy the tight ones because it's a little more dramatic?
No, I think it's more enjoyable when you just know you want them. I mean, that's all, that's gotta, and there's been those times, when I, at Rayburn, where I get out there and I catch the fish and I say, well, I got this one. And I told my partner, I think I was fishing with Homer Humphreys, and I said, man, let's get out here. If I can catch one on a Bagley crankbait, I get $1,000 bonus. I mean, it's one of those deals. So I catch one, and then I can say I caught him on Bagley crankbait. We all do things like that, so yeah, it was, that was back in the old days, and that's when you got it. Those are good times when you got it, and same type of thing. I think I did one at Seminole where I caught a big fish right at the end of the day, and I'm like, yeah, and I threw him in the boat, and I just took off through the stumps, bouncing over everything, and make the run, knowing that when I get there, you've got it won, and those are probably the most special wins.
For the folks watching who don't have the great privilege of knowing Shaw Grigsby, and I count myself as very privileged in that regard, know that he is the guy you see on TV. Know that he is the guy who's always smiling and always up, and who has that high-pitched squeal when a big fish hits and he fights it. That is who he is. And Shaw, with regard to the ones that got away, the fish that you still think about years and years later, did they make the successes sweeter, or do the successes make the ones that got away even more bitter?
No, I think, I look back, Ken, and, it was a few years back, I got inducted to the Bass Fishing Hall of Fame, and that's huge. That's the biggest thing that can happen to you in your career, by far, whether you win an Angler Year or the Classic or whatever. You've got, when my grandkids go to Bass Pro Shops 20 years from now, here's a picture of their grandfather. Or when my great grandkids, that's here's this bronze plaque. So that's forever. That's like, it's not a statistic, it's just a forever deal, and that's probably the most special. So I look back on it, great career, and I hope I've inspired a lot of people to go out and go fishing and enjoy fishing. I enjoy fishing. I love it. I do it for spare time. I do it when I'm just, come home and have fun. I go fishing. And so I hope I've inspired people to do that and go fishing and take that to whatever level they can take it to. I mean, if they want to tournament fish and be professional, absolutely get serious in it. It's a great time in the sport when we've got junior anglers and high school anglers, and we've got, college scholarships, and I'd have probably graduated college if I had a college scholarship for fishing, and yeah. So, and then you've got, the professional ranks that is just expanding and done very well. So yeah, I hope I've inspired people to get involved and enjoy the sport of fishing, because I think it truly is the single best sport out there. And you see that when you see people that play, in the NFL for X number of years, and next thing they do, they go fishing. Hey, I want, and same thing with baseball players and motocross racers and whatever. When your body can't take what that short lifespan is, they can keep going and fishing, and it still is competitive and is hard and is tough. And you have to figure out all these different variables every day you hit the water. And it's a cool sport. And you can do it like Clun won at what, 72 or 70?
Yeah, he won it at early 70s. He won one in the late 60s, then he won another in his early 70s on the St. John's, as you know. Amazing.
Amazing. So that's cool that you can see that. And so what a great sport. What a great sport. Do it when you're 2, 3, 4 years old. I took my granddaughter last year, and we're out, and I bought her this cool little spinning reel that you turn the handle, and it's got flashing lights on it. I mean, it's really cool, right? And so we're sitting there fishing in this pit, and she's just there, and all of a sudden she just takes the rod and reel and just goes, and there it goes. It's sunk in 20 feet of water, never to be seen again. But she still loves it. She still enjoyed it. Yeah, she threw the rod and reel over, but guess what? We have to get another one. So, but it's just a fun sport. Get outside, enjoy the outdoors, see cool stuff. Eagles and ospreys and otters and all kinds of stuff. So yeah, alligators and cool deal.
Yeah, I think that stuff is more important than ever now.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And to your comment about hoping you inspired people to enjoy the sport and get outdoors, there is no question, sir. You have inspired millions of people to do so. And you are and will always be one of the most popular guys out there, one of the most inspiring guys out there. And hey, Shaw, I appreciate you as a friend, and I thank you so much for joining us on the Big Bass Podcast.
Well, Ken, thank you for having me, and certainly appreciate your friendship. And tell Terry he missed out.
That's what I want everybody to do is, just as a joke, folks, you can jump on the YouTube comments and tell Terry that he was not even a part of the best episode of the Big Bass Podcast. I'm mean like that, Shaw. I'm mean.
That's okay. That's okay.
Well, Shaw, again, thank you so much, man. I think folks are going to absolutely love seeing you on the Big Bass Podcast. Really appreciate your time and your friendship. You take care, my friend. Good luck down the trail of the Toyota Series, and I look forward to seeing you very soon.
All right. Take care, Ken.
I love that story from Shaw. It's heartbreaking, to hear the impact and to watch the man tell the story of a fish that changed his life and career. Not a giant fish in the sense of what it weighed, but an enormous fish in terms of what it could have done for his career. And I love how open and honest Shaw is about that. So it's a great story, even though it is not an uplifting or a fun story to hear. A guy who does have a lot of fun stories to hear lately is our next very special guest. And his name is Jeff Gustafson. If you're not familiar with Jeff Gustafson, better known to the bass world as Gussie, you must have been living under a laydown. The Canadian pro just won the 2023 Bassmaster Classic and is building his own legend on the tournament trail. Gussie's niceness is legendary. Just to meet him is to absolutely love this guy. But whatever tales you may have heard about how nice and thoughtful and polite and engaging he is, he's actually far nicer and far more likable than that, which is terrifically hard to believe, but true. And despite the fact that Gussie won the Classic less than 2 weeks before we recorded this episode, he still found the time to record the story we're going to share with you right now.
All right, nobody wants to talk about lost fish, but it happens. And those are often the most memorable fish catches for tournament anglers, like more so than the fish that end up in your boat a lot of the time. And, growing up fishing a lot of tournaments as a kid around home where I live, I lost several fish that, costed me winning the tournament, team tournaments, costed my partners and I winning tournaments. And, some of those are, over 20 years ago, and I still remember that jump when the smallmouth spit my bait perfectly. But, in some of the pro tournaments, I've been fortunate. I've never lost a fish that actually costed me winning the tournament. I've lost several that costed me getting a check. and certainly making some cuts and that sort of thing. The first one that comes to mind for me, Lake Fork 2021, had a decent tournament, and there was, I was sort of fishing offshore a little bit. There was some fish starting to get offshore, but there was a lot of fish still on beds. And every day I had a couple stretches where I'd do a little bit of bed fishing. And one of these stretches that I'd fished, this was on day 3 of the tournament. And one of the stretches I'd caught a couple fish the first 2 days off of, and I was sneaking my way along there. And I got to one that looked like about a 4-pounder. So I started working on it. And this is at about 10 or 11, and before lunch, 10, 11 in the morning. And I look up, almost a 3/4 of a cast sort of down the bank and up against the reeds. I'm like, that's a weird looking dark spot where, over a white spot. And it didn't like dawn on me at first that it could be a bass. Like, it almost looked too big. And I'm working on this fish, and it didn't register with me because I was so focused on this fish that I'd been fishing for. And a couple minutes later, I look up again and look down, and the black thing's gone. And then here it comes. It comes over the light spot again and locks down. And I'm like, wow. Poles come up. I start sliding down, and I'm trying to stay a ways out. If I can get a good cast in at this thing before she knows that I'm there, maybe I'm going to catch it. And I flip in there a couple times, and I get a bite. I set the hook, and it's like a 2-pound male. So I let it go, goes back, and I mess around with this big female. It's the biggest fish I've ever seen on a bed, probably the biggest bass I've ever looked at. Like, an 8 to 12 pounder. I mean, giant bass. And so I'm all excited, and I mess around, and finally she's, leaving and not really staying on the bed. So I give up after a while, like, not catchable. So about 2-3 hours later, I'm, maybe last hour of the day, I've had a decent day, but not awesome. I got to go back and try this big fish again. So I roll in there. I think I actually caught the 4-pounder as I was sneaking in that I'd been working on earlier. And then, get up close, and there she is again. And I start pitching. I'm staying back as far as I can, and she's not having anything to do with my bait, and finally leaves. And I'm about to give up, and I hit the button for my talons, and they come up, and I don't touch the trolling motor, but I just start drifting in a little bit closer. And then I see her just really tucked up against the reeds, right over top of the bed. And I put the poles down, gotta make a few more casts. Like, this is the biggest bass I might ever catch in my life. And I start flipping in there, and finally she started to get mad, and I think she's gonna bite. When they do like the spinorama, they spin around on your bait and they're getting agitated, like, that's usually a good sign. And I was just using a little Z-Man craw. I like using those baits when bed fishing because they stand up a little bit, the Elaztec's buoyant. And I flipped in there expecting, I'm going to get a bite. I flip in there, and I mean, just noses down on it, eats it like the dream scenario. And I was actually on my knees, probably only about 12 or 15 feet away. And she eats it. I set the hook. The fish comes up like the biggest mouth I've ever seen on a bass. It does a couple, wallows, and my bait comes flying out. So ate it, and I set the hook hard, and just bit of bad luck, never penetrated, and that was the end of that. Never got the bass. I actually have a video of it, but there was profound profanity when the fish came off, so I can't share that video with anybody. But yeah, it was a big bass, Lake Fork's land of the giants, and it was sort of my one that got away.
So that's just a little snippet of what it's like to visit with Jeff Gustafson, and to hear that story about that Lake Fork giant is quite interesting, I think. So if you're not already a Gusty fan, I'll give you about 3 seconds to get on the bandwagon. Another angler who was able to send us a video for this episode about the ones that got away is Skeet Reese. Skeet is absolutely one of the all-time greats of our sport. He was the 2007 Bassmaster Angler of the Year, and he won the Bassmaster Classic in 2009. Skeet is not only one of the very best to ever compete on the tournament trail, he's also one of the smartest guys you'll ever meet. He's a terrific business person, a wonderful family man, and one of the most admirable people in our sport. And here's Skeet's story about a fish that got away. And it comes from a long time ago when Skeet was just a young angler. And I think you'll like the moral of the story, as Skeet puts it. So hang in there to the end.
All right, so this is the big one that got away. How do we, I think we all have some fish story of our career, lives, or whatever, that just something always stands out. And I've got a few big ones that I've lost over the years, but there's one for sure that just stands out the most for me. And it goes back to, I was in high school, and there's a little lake called Spring Lake in Northern California. And I had actually cut school that day, just because that's what we did. So I cut school, and so I head to Spring Lake, and I'm just fishing from shore. So I got a spinning rod, 8-pound test, a little 4-inch weightless worm, June bug, chartreuse tail. I was like 16, I think I was 16 years old at the point at that time. And so I go up to the lake, and I had caught 10-pounders out of Spring Lake and big ones before. And so I knew it was in there, but it's springtime. And so fish were starting to move up on the banks, and you can walk around, you can sight fish them, and you catch some good ones here and there. And I had walked around, I caught some fish. And I remember coming up, there was this big willow tree that overhung over the water, but you could walk underneath it, and those fish were always underneath the shade, and you had maybe 6-8 foot of clearance between the shoreline and where the tree limbs actually hit the water out there. So you could always go in there, and the sun would kind of come through the outside of it, and you could kind of, just make all the fish really stand out. You could see them underneath the tree. And so I snuck up underneath this tree, and I remember there was, whatever, 6 or 8 fish, just sitting underneath this tree, and they're like 2 to 4 pounders. And so I, stealth, and I pitched my little worm up there. And I remember seeing these fish just kind of like coming to it, and all of a sudden they just got out of the way. And here comes this beast of a fish that is just unlike anything I'd ever seen before. And it comes up and goes, grabs my little worm, and I go, dink. And that's all I could do at that point in time. This fish, it goes, zzz, just goes out to this main lake, zzz, and all I could do is watch as this line is stripping off my spinning reel and getting lower and lower and lower. And oh, this is not good. And finally, I had tried to tighten the drag a little bit, but it's like 8-pound test. It's like, oh, and you're hoping the fish is going to like tire and turn. It didn't stop. Dink! To this day. So I still, to this day, guesstimate that fish in the 14 to 17 pound class. There was a lot of 12s, 13s, 14s. There was an 18 caught out of there. So a 14 to 17 pound bass does not come every day for a lot of guys. There's a lot of, and that's what it still kills me to this day, because all my buddies out west, especially the Southern California guys that fished all the trout lakes the years past, oh, they all got 15s, 16s, 18s, 19s. I'm like, whatever. So I've caught 26 over 10, but I can't break 12 pounds. But this is that one that I'll never, ever forget. That is the big one that got away from me, that still, I think I have nightmares about that one fish to this day. But I guess moral of the story is don't cut school. You won't lose a big one. So I hope you enjoyed my little story.
Don't you just love the moral of that story? Don't skip school. That's great. It's a star-studded episode, folks. Already we've had Shaw Grigsby and Jeff Gustafson and Skeet Reese. And believe it or not, we've got a guy who's even a bigger name in our sport, even a guy who's even more famous. There is no bigger name in all of fishing, much less bass fishing, than our next special guest, and that's Bill Dance. Bill was bass fishing's first superstar. He won 7 of the first 14 BASS tournaments, and he caught the first bass in BASS competition on Beaver Lake in Arkansas. Technically, it wasn't BASS at that point, but it was the first modern tournament that Ray Scott put on. And Bill won the Angler of the Year 3 times with BASS. He's been the host of Bill Dance Outdoors for more than 50 years now. He's the author of a bunch of books on bass fishing, including this one, his most recent publication, Fish Tales, which is available at BillDanceStore.com, and for which I was enormously honored because I got to write the foreword for that book. So our next guest, the most famous angler on the planet, is Bill Dance. Here we go. Bill, welcome to the Big Bass Podcast. We sure appreciate your being on the show with us.
Well, it's glad to be here, Ken. I always enjoy being with you and everything we've ever done over the years. It's a real
thank
pleasure.
you. That's awfully kind of you. Now, when we talk about Big Bass and the Big Bass Podcast, we're not just talking about giant fish, and you've certainly caught more than your share of those. Sometimes a big bass is an important bass, maybe in a tournament. Maybe it's not a 10-pounder, but it's just important for some reason or another. I want to fast forward to this event right here. Is an old Stein that's 50 years old.
Golly, yeah.
Yeah, and it ties into a lot of what you're telling us about Glenn Andrews teaching you deep water fishing and stuff like that, because in 73 you put the Carolina rig on the map, and you've got an amazing story about a fish that got away.
Well, it was what Glenn had taught me about deep water fishing. And when we went to the Classic in 73, we could only take 10 pounds of tackle.
Right. And for folks who don't recall, because not a lot of people were there, this was a Classic out of McCormick, South Carolina on Clarks Hill Reservoir. Now, some folks call it J. Strom Thurman Reservoir if you live in South Carolina.
It was Clark Hill. And, to pack 10 pounds of tackle, you think, oh, that's not much. But 10 pounds of tackle is a lot of tackle. Today, when I look back at it, it's a lot of tackle. But for some reason, I was scrambling, putting stuff in and out of my tackle box. And I said, fishing that deep water, one of my search baits back then was a sonar, a head and sonar, half-ounce sonar. Because I could throw it and it'd go to the bottom quick, and I could pick it up, boom, 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 and cover a lot of water with it because
early lipless crankbait.
Yeah, it hit the bottom. I could lift it up, bump, 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 and cover a lot of quick water with it. Only problem, it'd hang up. You got it in rough cover, but it was still a great search bait. But another bait for fishing deep water was a Carolina rig, and I said, I ought to carry a few of those. So I reached in there and I had 3 packs of Bill Jackson's floating worms. I didn't know where we were going. So I packed for real deep water.
Yeah, that was a mystery Classic. Ray loaded you guys up on an airplane and you didn't know where you were going until you got there.
Exactly. It was a mystery lake, and the Delta took off and flew us, and the plane would go around in a circle and it'd fly west, and then we'd fly back east and we'd fly south, and everybody'd look and say, oh, I know we're going to Texas. We're going to Rayburn. And then the plane would fly, oh no, we're going to Texoma. No, we're going to Table Rock. And then, no, we're going to Kissimmee. I know where we're going. Everybody'd be on the side of the plane. The plane would turn up on the side, and everybody take your seat, please. And we didn't know where we were going. Everybody was just guessing. But anyway, we flew into that area in South Carolina to Clark Hill, and we landed. And I said, what kind of lake is that? And one of the local guys said, oh, it's a deep, clear lake. And I went, ooh, Deep Clear Lake. I like that. And right off the bat, and some of them said Deep Clear Lake. Some of them didn't like that, but I did because I felt more comfortable fishing deep water because I knew deep water fish are more dependable. And if you find them, they bunch up, and weather doesn't change them up too much. We had a weather change or anything. So anyway, I went up first day of practice. I ran here and I ran there, and I looked here and checked here, checked there, and did this, did that. And I came out of a creek, and it was just a natural looking spot. But I saw a boat pull in on the shallow end of it and made 2 or 3 casts, and he went on. And I came in behind the boat, but I came in way further out. He fished, it looked like in 5 to 6 feet of water. Well, I came in at about 20 feet of water. And I looked, and I saw fish in about 25, 28 feet of water. And I said, wow, look here. So I spun around, and there were fish about 32 feet deep. And I didn't know if there were stripers or white bass or largemouth. And I had 2 jigging spoons, and it was kind of rough. The cover was rock and stuff there because I got a hard reed. So I put a jigging spoon on, and I dropped it down. I jigged it a couple times. Boop, I caught one. It was about a 2-pound largemouth. And I thought, well, that's largemouth. And so I said, well, maybe that largemouth was mixed in with some white bass. Let me try it again. So I dropped it back down, and I caught another largemouth, about 2.5 pounds. And I said, oh, that's largemouth. So I turned him loose, and I left. I got off that spot, and I ran way down the lake, kept looking, and I found an island with a long, long point on it that went way out, and it dropped down, and it came back up again. And I was looking in 30, 35 feet of water, and I found another scoop of fish, but it was a long run, and the wind got up that next day, as best I recall. And where I had found the fish at the mouth of that creek off that long point, I said, that's where I need to go. Well, as best I recall, and you've got as good a memory as anybody, Ken, I want to say the limit was 10.
Yes, sir. You had the most consistent tournament, really, of anybody. On day one, Bill, you had a limit that weighed just over 12 pounds. Not a big limit, of course, but a solid limit puts you in the top 8 or 10. Tom Mann led that day. He had a big lead. He had a 5.25 pound lead. He had over 20 pounds that day, but he couldn't back it up on days 2 or 3. You had another good day on day 2 with another limit that weighed 17.3. And day 3, a third limit. As a matter of fact, Bill, here's a little Bill Dance trivia that Bill Dance may not know. You became the first man in Bassmaster Classic history to limit every day of the Classic.
Well, lucky, I guess. I went, what those fish did, Charlie Searcy was the outdoor editor. We had a writer observer, and he was my partner. He was the outdoor editor for the Nashville Tennessean, and then he went on down to Chattanooga and became the editor of the Chattanooga Times. Charlie was a great guy, and I pulled back in on those fish the second morning, and couldn't catch them. And I moved out just a little. They went to 38 feet. I remember that. They moved deeper. And I think they got into some bigger fish because I had a better catch, better weight that second day.
You had a better catch every day of the event.
Right. But the problem, I only had those 9 worms, those 9 floating worms. And they were beginning to tear up. And I remember Charlie, he said, how many you got left? And then the third day, I mean, I had ragged pieces of those worms, and I was trying my best. The fish would jump when he'd come up to the top. Oh, don't jump, because, you know, he'd throw his head back and forth. And going into the last day, I had 3 worms left, and they looked like they had gone to surgery a dozen times. And Charlie would take a cigarette lighter, and he'd fuse them back together, and he'd put the lighter under them, and he'd go, ah, boy, that plastic's hot. And then he'd stick them down in the water and then shape them back up for me. I don't know if he was supposed to do that or not, but he did. And so the American Sportsman was a television series back then. Kurt Gowdy, you remember Kurt Gowdy and the American Sportsman series? They were on the lake shooting video. Well, we all do dumb things. And but anyway, I'll tell you this story. My wife has always said, everything happens for a reason. And Diane always said that. She said that so many times. Everything happens for a reason. And so the last day of that tournament, I was catching them, but they had even dropped deeper. They'd moved down to about 42 feet. And but I was still catching them. And I got my limit, and I was working on my limit. And Bruce Buckley, who was the photographer for American Sportsman, their camera boat pulled up, and he said, y'all doing any good? And about that time, the biggest fish that I had hung in the 3 days that I'd been on that hole bit. And I set the hook, and I said, Charlie, this is a good one. And he pulled and pulled, and he came up and he jumped. They said the fish weighed 8.5 pounds. It did not. It did not weigh anywhere close to 8.5 pounds. The fish would have weighed probably 5 1/4. He was over 5 pounds. But I've caught. I knew. Guess him. I'm looking at him. He's as close as from. He was closest from me to the back of the boat, and he jumped, and I went, "Oh, just don't do that." And he came back around. He came up again. And he jumped, and so I held him down, and I got him right up to the boat. And I remember, I think it was Buckley that said, and they were taping it, and he said, "Let him swim out. Let him swim out. Just let him go out just one more time." And something said, "Don't do that. Don't do that." And they said, "Please let him come out toward the camera just once." And so I just held the rod and mashed the button on my reel and let him swim out about 6 feet. And another surge, the fish had a surge. I thought it had him whipped. Had another surge, he went down and he pulled off. And when he pulled off, I took a hard, deep breath, and Charlie said, there'll be another one. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. Don't let it get to you. Come on, come on, come on. And I just reeled up, fixed my worm, and just threw right back, just like it was a pounder. And I was going, golly. I said, that's the tournament right there. And I said, and I looked, and they said, up, lost him. And they just pulled off like it wasn't anything to it. And Charlie
to give the folks a little perspective here, Bill went into that last day trailing. Rayo Breckenridge is leading the Derby by a pretty healthy amount, and Bill needs a big comeback, and he has that opportunity. Rayo Breckenridge stumbles on day 3. Bill has a big day. Bill winds up. Well, we'll tell you about the margin of victory here in just a minute. But Bill, let me let you go.
Anyway, I went ahead and limited out, and never did get another big fish, but I had a good string, and I went ahead and limited out. And Charlie never mentioned the fish, and I never mentioned the fish, and but I sure thought of the fish. I thought about the one that got away, and I've thought since that time. I've thought a lot about that fish, but. You go by your own intuitions. When you feel like something's right and you need to do it, you do it. And I knew I should not have let that fish go back out. I had the fish and I know without question I could have landed the fish, but I didn't. And but anyway, when I went in, I had a good weight, and I don't know if you know this or not, but Rayo broke down coming in, and he was out just a short distance from the weigh-in area, and would have been disqualified. But Roland was coming in and saw Rayo, and I would have done the same thing. He helped Rayo come get in. And as a result, when he brought Rayo in, it allowed Rayo to weigh his fish in, and just in the nick of time. And as a result, everybody was congratulating me. You won the tournament. You won the Classic. You won the Classic. And I truthfully thought I had won the Classic. And you build up a big high right there. And then when Rayo weighed in, he beat me out of first place. And it was that real high, that big rush, and it's just like an inflatable inner tube, and it all goes out of you at one time, and it's a hard thing to explain. You fish for something so big, you work all year for the Super Bowl, you play all your life to make the Super Bowl, you play all your life to make the Masters, and you miss the putt just by that much. But it's not the golf ball, it's not the club. It's you know, that you hit it too hard or this way. I think I did everything right up to that one point. I could have caught that fish, there's no question in my mind, if I had not let him run back out. I made the mistake. The putter that putted the ball at the Masters, he hit the ball too hard, or he didn't hit it hard enough. The player that threw the interception, it's not the ball's fault. It's the quarterback that threw the ball. It's his fault. It's the pitcher that pitched the World Series pitch. He threw a slider, but it didn't slide, and the opposing team knocked it over the fence. You have to experience that feeling that the quarterback felt when he threw the interception, the pitcher felt when he threw the slider that didn't go, the putter that missed the Masters, the quarterback that missed the Super Bowl, the pitcher that missed the World Series, the winning the World Series. Those are big things in their lives. The Classic was a big thing in my life. So I stood there and trying to smile. I tried to keep my chin up high enough to keep the tears from rolling out of my eyes. And Diane was sitting across from me, and she comes walking across, and she says, excuse me, she caught my hand, and she said, I know how you feel, but excuse me, she said, you remember me telling you once that everything happens for a reason? And I said, yep, I sure do. And she said, I'm going to tell you something that might make you feel a little bit better. You know, Rayo is a farmer up near Beech Grove, Arkansas, that's near Paragould, Arkansas, in northeast Arkansas. And they have had a couple of really bad years. And she knew Marilyn pretty well, Rayo's wife. Mm-hmm. And Marilyn was losing her eyesight. And winning that Classic afforded them the money to have with their insurance, and that money helped them for her to have our surgery to save her eyesight.
Wow.
And Diane says, you didn't know that, did you? And I said, no, I didn't. But I'm glad you told me, because that makes me feel 1,000 times better. And that rush that went out just came right back, you know, and then I felt 1,000 times better. And then Diane grabbed me again, and she looked at me and she said, remember, everything happens for a reason. And I said, you're right, it does. Everything happens for a reason. And then I walked back over and I hugged Marilyn, and I said, I'm really proud of Rayo. And she said, I am so happy for him. We're so happy. And she had tears in her eyes. And then I walked over and I gave Rayo a big hug, and then I slapped him. But then, no, I didn't. No, I didn't either. Rayo was a wonderful, wonderful guy, and a very good friend. And we fished together these oxbows around Memphis. He was so much fun to be with and enjoy to fish with, and he was just a wonderful, wonderful guy. But like I say, it was his time to win, and he won, and everything happens for a reason. But that was a great event, and but like I said in the beginning, the moral of that story is with Glenn, we learned by asking questions, and the one that got away, that'll always be. I'll always remember that fish. I didn't see him get off, but I sure felt him get off. But
and I like Miss Diane's comments about everything happens for a reason. Well,
she's dead on. She was right about that. It was just one of those deals.
Bill Dance, I tell you, not only are you just a spectacular storyteller, and I want to tell folks again, we're going to put up the address, BillDanceStore.com. You got to get this book, Fish Tales. It is a whole bunch of wonderful stories from the man himself. Bill, you're a hero of mine. You're a great man. And
you are too, Ken. You've been a great friend for a long time, and I love you to death. It's been my honor. It's
been my honor, sir. Absolutely my honor. And thank you for sharing that story of one that got away. You not only made it a great story, but you made it so poignant. And cannot thank you enough for your time, for all you've done for our sport, for all you've done for our industry. As I said, you're a great man. I'm so proud to call you friend.
Well, thank you, buddy. I feel the same about you too. You're a great guy, bud. Thank you so much for letting me be part of your show, and I hope to see you again real soon. And I know I will. Absolutely, you will. I'm always on the lookout for Bill Dance. I got to get my hug. That's right, buddy. Thank you. Thank you so much. Bill. Bye now. See y'all. You know, I've heard Bill tell that story many times through the years. It's hard to imagine an angler in the biggest tournament of the year, the Bassmaster Classic, letting a fish run a little while so a cameraman could get some pictures. But that's the kind of guy Bill Dance is, and unfortunately his generosity with his time and all cost him a big tournament. But as Bill would tell you, things happen for a reason, and the reason in that case was it helped Marilyn Breckenridge save her eyesight. So a big loss to Bill, an important fish that got away, but a greater good may have been served right there. Hey, I want to thank you for hanging out with me for this episode of the Big Bass Podcast. Before I sign off, I've got a favor to ask. Please subscribe, like, share, give us a comment, or post a review. I don't understand the algorithms that drive the reach of our show, but I do know that those kind of things help. And don't forget to check out our website, thebigbasspodcast.com. You can find all of our episodes right there, and you can search them for different topics or aspects of big bass that may interest you personally. If you want to contact us, our email addresses are ken@thebigbasspodcast.com, terry@thebigbasspodcast.com, and nathan@thebigbasspodcast.com. Once again, I'm Ken Duke, and on behalf of my partners, Nathan Benson and Terry Battisti, thanks for joining us. Be sure to check back next week. We'll have a new show with a story that you will not and cannot find anywhere else. And remember, size matters.